February 20th, 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. American forces are collapsing. German panzer tanks smash through defensive positions that US commanders thought were impregnable. Artillery shells tear apart inexperienced American infantry units. Within 48 hours, more than 6,000 American soldiers are dead, wounded, or captured. It's the first major engagement between American ground forces and the Wehrmacht, and it's a catastrophe. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel has just delivered a brutal lesson to the United States Army. But here's what makes this defeat different from every other battlefield humiliation in World War II. The Americans don't just lick their wounds and move on. They study what happened. They analyze every tactical decision Rommel made. They read his book. They dissect his career. And they turn their greatest defeat into the foundation of their future victories. Within 3 months, those same American forces will be winning. Within 2 years, they'll be sweeping across Europe. The transformation starts with one question that echoes through every American command post from North Africa to the Pentagon. How did Rommel do it? And how do we learn to do it better? Erwin Rommel isn't just another Nazi general. He's different, and the Americans know it from the start. While other Wehrmacht commanders are products of the Prussian military aristocracy, graduates of elite war colleges with centuries of family military tradition, Rommel is the son of a schoolteacher from southern Germany. He doesn't come from the officer class. He earns his way up through competence and courage, not through bloodline and connections. That difference matters more than anyone realizes at the time because it means Rommel thinks like a tactician, not like a politician. He cares about what works on the battlefield, not about what looks good in Berlin. His reputation was built in World War I, decades before anyone in America had heard his name. As a young infantry officer, Rommel leads small unit actions that become legendary. In October 1917 at the Battle of Caporetto on the Italian front, Lieutenant Rommel commanded a mountain battalion attacking fortified Austrian positions. The textbook approach would be to assault directly, accept heavy casualties and grind forward. Rommel does something else entirely. He finds gaps. He infiltrates. He moves at night through terrain everyone says is impassable. In 52 hours of continuous combat, his unit captures 9,000 enemy soldiers and 81 artillery pieces while suffering just 6 dead and 30 wounded. It's not just a victory, it's a revolution in tactics. For this action, Rommel receives Germany's highest military decoration, the Pour le Mérite. After the war, he does something that will ultimately provide American generals with their instruction manual. He writes it all down. In 1937, Rommel published Infantry Infantry Attacks in English. It's not a theoretical work. It's a tactical cookbook filled with specific examples from his own combat experience. He describes exactly how he analyzed terrain, how he used small unit maneuvers to outflank superior forces, and how he maintained momentum even when logic said to consolidate. The book becomes required reading at German military academies. But it doesn't stop there. Translations appear. Copies make their way to foreign military institutions. By 1940, American officers at West Point and the Army War College were reading Rommel's tactical manual. They're studying his methods. They just don't know yet that they'll soon be fighting against the man who wrote it. When World War II begins, Rommel commanded the 7th Panzer Division during the invasion of France in May 1940. Here's where he demonstrates that everything in his book translates perfectly to mechanized warfare. His division earns the nickname Ghost Division because it moves so fast that the German High Command often doesn't know where it is. Rommel's tanks cover distances that staff officers say are impossible. He doesn't wait for supply lines to catch up. He doesn't consolidate positions before advancing. He strikes, exploits, strikes again. Speed and aggression overcome planning and caution. In 6 weeks, France collapses and Rommel's division has penetrated deeper and faster than any other German formation. Hitler notices. In February 1941, when Germany sends an expeditionary force to North Africa to shore up failing Italian forces, Hitler personally selects Rommel to command it. North Africa is where Rommel becomes a legend. The desert is a perfect laboratory for mobile warfare. There are no forests to hide in, no cities to bog down in, no rivers to defend behind. It's terrain, sun, sand and distance. Tank warfare in its purest form, and Rommel rewrites the rules. He arrives in Libya with just 2 divisions, the 15th and 21st Panzer, forming the Deutsches Afrika Korps. The British forces opposing him have numerical superiority and established supply lines. Rommel has neither. What he does have is an understanding of warfare that his enemies don't expect and can't immediately counter. Here's one specific innovation that terrifies the British and later the Americans: the 88mm gun. Originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, the 88 is a long-barreled, high-velocity cannon meant to shoot down bombers. Rommel looks at it and sees something else. He sees a gun that can penetrate any tank armour at ranges far beyond what conventional anti-tank weapons can achieve. So he uses 88mm flak batteries as tank killers. He positions them in hull-down defensive positions where only the gun barrel shows above the terrain. British tanks advance confident they're out of range of German anti-tank weapons. Then the 88s open fire at 2,000 yards. British tanks explode before they even see what's shooting at them. It's not just clever, it's psychologically devastating. Tank crews lose confidence. Commanders hesitate to attack. Rommel's innovation transforms the battlefield dynamics. But the real genius isn't in the weapons, it's in how he uses them. Rommel employs a tactic that American officers will study for the rest of the war. He creates killing zones. He positions his forces to lure British tanks into pursuit, then channels them into pre-sighted fields of fire, where dug-in 88s and anti-tank guns wait. The British think they're chasing a retreating enemy. They're actually being pulled into an ambush. By the time they realise what's happening, it's too late. This tactic requires perfect coordination between reconnaissance, armour and artillery. It requires trust that subordinate commanders will execute without constant orders. It requires a speed of decision-making that the British command structure isn't built for. Then there's his personal leadership style, which becomes as famous as his tactics. Rommel doesn't command from headquarters 50 miles behind the lines. He's at the front, in a command vehicle, or sometimes on foot, often with the forward reconnaissance units. His staff officers complain that they frequently don't know where he is. His superiors in Berlin complain that he ignores orders and acts on his own initiative. Rommel doesn't care. He believes that warfare at the operational level requires the commander to see the terrain, understand the enemy's movements in real time, and make decisions faster than the enemy can react. You can't do that from a headquarters tent studying maps that are hours out of date. This approach earns him the nickname Desert Fox from the British press. It's meant as a compliment. Even as he's defeating them, the British respect him. Why? Because unlike other Wehrmacht commanders, Rommel fights a clean war. He treats prisoners humanely. He issues explicit orders that POWs are to be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. When British soldiers surrender, they're disarmed and given water, not executed. This isn't just decency, though Rommel does have a personal code of military honour. It's also psychological warfare. British soldiers know that surrender to Rommel's forces doesn't mean death. That knowledge makes them less likely to fight to the last man in hopeless situations, which speeds Rommel's victories and reduces his casualties. In early 1942, Prime Minister Winston Churchill stood before Parliament to explain why British forces in North Africa were being repeatedly defeated. He says something extraordinary for a wartime leader to say about an enemy commander. We have a very daring and skillful opponent against us, and, may I say across the havoc of war, a great general. Think about that. The leader of Britain, in the middle of a war for survival, praises the enemy general who is killing British soldiers. Churchill isn't being defeatist, he's being honest. And that honesty reflects something the Americans are about to learn the hard way. November 1942, Operation Torch. American forces land in North Africa in Morocco and Algeria. It's the US Army's first major offensive operation of the war. The troops are enthusiastic, well-equipped, but completely inexperienced. They've trained in the United States. They've never been shot at. Their officers have never commanded in combat. And they're about to face German forces that have been fighting in the desert for 2 years under the most successful field commander Germany has. The Americans initially face Vichy French resistance, which they overcome in a few days. Then they start pushing east toward Tunisia, where German forces are consolidating. For the first few months, they're not facing Rommel directly. They're fighting against German and Italian units under different commanders. The Americans make mistakes. They learn lessons. They start to develop combat competence. Then, in January 1943, everything changes. Rommel, having retreated across Libya under pressure from British General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army, arrives in Tunisia. He's tired. He's sick. His forces are battered. But he's still Erwin Rommel, and he's looking at maps showing American positions. What he sees makes him decide to attack. The Americans have spread their forces across a wide front. Their positions aren't mutually supporting. Their communication is poor. They've made all the classic mistakes of inexperienced armies. Rommel knows he can't defeat both the British advancing from the east and the Americans pressing from the west. But he can strike one hard blow against the weaker force, inflict maximum damage, maybe force a temporary withdrawal, and buy time. He chooses Kasserine Pass, a gap in the Atlas Mountains where American forces hold defensive positions. February 14th, 1943, German forces probe American positions. February 19, Rommel launches his main attack with elements of both the Afrika Korps and the 5th Panzer Army. What happens next is a masterclass in exploitation warfare and a disaster for American arms. Rommel's tanks smash through the pass. American commanders, confused about where the main attack is coming from, issue contradictory orders. Units retreat when they should stand. Some stand when they should withdraw. Communication breaks down. The German penetration turns into a rout. American forces abandon equipment and fall back in disorder. It's chaos. It's humiliating. It's exactly what Rommel's tactics are designed to create. But here's what's different about Kasserine Pass compared to the defeats France suffered in 1940 or the disasters the Soviets endured in 1941. The Americans don't rationalize it away. They don't blame bad luck or overwhelming enemy strength. They conduct systematic after-action reviews at every level from squad to army group. They ask brutal, honest questions. Why did our defenses fail? Why couldn't commanders communicate? Why did experienced German units outmaneuver us so easily? What did Rommel see in our positions that we didn't see ourselves? And then they do something that turns defeat into education. They study Rommel himself, not as a villain. As a teacher, officers who can get copies of Infantry Attacks should read it. Intelligence officers compile reports on every engagement Rommel has fought. Tactical analysts break down his use of combined arms, his reconnaissance methods, and his exploitation tactics. One copy of Rommel's book reportedly makes its way through American command posts in North Africa, with notes scribbled in the margins, passages underlined, tactical lessons extracted. Here's the critical insight that American commanders internalize from studying Rommel. Modern warfare isn't about set-piece battles where you mass your forces and attack in coordinated waves. It's about tempo. It's about decision-making speed. It's about getting inside the enemy's decision cycle. Rommel moves faster than his opponents can think. By the time British or American commanders recognize what's happening, formulate a response, and issue orders, Rommel is already somewhere else doing something different. The solution isn't to be more cautious or more methodical. It's to be faster and more aggressive. By March 1943, American forces were implementing changes. They improve radio communication. They decentralize decision-making authority, so junior officers can act without waiting for permission. They study German tactics and develop counter-tactics specifically designed to defeat Rommel's methods. When the Americans encounter German forces again at the Battle of El Geta in March, the result is different. US forces hold their ground. They use their own anti-tank defenses to create killing zones. They don't panic when German tanks maneuver to flank them. They've learned. Rommel, now seriously ill, leaves Africa in March 1943. He never faces American forces again, but his influence on the US Army is just beginning. There's a scene in the 1970 film Patton where George C. Scott, playing General George S. Pitt, Patton, watches his forces defeat a German tank attack and shouts, "Rommel, you magnificent bastard, I read your book. It's Hollywood." That moment never happened in that way, but the sentiment behind it is absolutely real. Patton did study Rommel, so did Omar Bradley, so did Dwight Eisenhower, so did every competent American general who fought in North Africa and then Europe. They studied him because Rommel demonstrated principles of mobile warfare that worked regardless of which side was using them. After North Africa, American armored doctrine changed. The US Army incorporates Rommel's emphasis on reconnaissance, his use of combined arms, his concepts of exploitation and pursuit. When American forces land in France in June 1944, they're not the same army that got torn apart at Kasserine Pass. They're faster, they're more aggressive. They trust their junior leaders to make decisions. They maintain momentum even when logic says to consolidate. They've become, in many ways, what Rommel taught them to be. But here's the question that haunts all of this. Why Rommel? Why do American generals study him more intensely than any other German commander? Germany has brilliant generals. Erich von Manstein is arguably a better strategist. Heinz Guderian is the father of German panzer doctrine. Albert Kasserine is a master of defensive warfare. Why does Rommel get the attention? 3 reasons. First, he writes it down. Infantry Attacks gives American officers access to Rommel's thinking in a way they never get from other German commanders. He explains not just what he did, but why. He shows his decision-making process. It's like having the enemy general as your instructor. Second, he fights the Americans directly. Kasserine Pass is personal. It's a lesson paid for in American blood. That makes it memorable in a way that studying German operations in Russia never could be. Third, and perhaps most important, Rommel represents a type of warfare that Americans instinctively understand. He's not fighting for ideology or political goals. He's fighting to win tactical engagements using speed, maneuver, and aggression. That's warfare stripped down to its essential elements. That's something professional soldiers can respect, even when they're on opposite sides. There's also the Rommel myth, and it's worth acknowledging. After the war, many historians argue that Rommel's reputation was inflated by Nazi propaganda, by British excuse-making, and by American storytelling. They point out that he was a mediocre strategist who understood tactics but ignored logistics, that he repeatedly disobeyed orders and nearly got his forces destroyed through reckless aggression, that his North African campaign was ultimately a failure that bled resources Germany needed elsewhere. All of that is true. Rommel's weaknesses were significant, but here's what's also true. At the tactical level, at the level of engagement between units on the battlefield, Rommel was brilliant. And tactics are what junior and mid-level officers need to learn. Strategy is for generals and politicians. Tactics are for captains and colonels. Rommel teaches tactics better than almost anyone. The US Army after World War II incorporates many of Rommel's principles into its doctrine. The emphasis on mobile warfare, the importance of reconnaissance, the concept of mission-type orders is where subordinate commanders are told what to achieve, not how to achieve it. The requirement for commanders to be forward where they can see the battlefield. These become fundamental to American military thinking. In the 1950s and 60s, when the Army developed its air-land battle doctrine for a potential war against the Soviets, Rommel's influence is still visible. Speed, maneuver, strike where the enemy is weak, maintain momentum, exploit success. There's a bitter irony in all of this. Rommel himself becomes a victim of the regime he served. In 1944, after the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler, Rommel was implicated. Whether he actually supported the coup is still debated. What isn't debated is that Hitler's inner circle decides Rommel is too dangerous to leave alive and too popular to execute publicly. On October 14th, 1944, 2 generals arrive at Rommel's home. They give him a choice: suicide by poison with full honours and protection for his family, or a public trial for treason with execution and reprisals against his wife and son. Rommel chooses the poison. Nazi Germany announces that the Desert Fox has died from wounds received in an Allied air attack. They give him a state funeral. The truth doesn't come out until after the war. By then, Rommel's reputation in America is secure. He's become the good German general, the one who fought honourably, who opposed Hitler, who could be respected without moral ambiguity. That image is partially accurate and partially mythological. The real Rommel was more complicated. He served the Nazi regime loyally for years. He benefited from Hitler's patronage. He was not part of the resistance until very late, if at all. But the tactical lessons he taught, those are real, regardless of his moral complexity. Today, if you walk into any US Army Command and General Staff College classroom, you'll still find discussions of Rommel's operations. His use of reconnaissance at the Battle of France, his exploitation tactics in the opening months of the North Africa campaign, his creation of mobile defensive positions. These are case studies in military education, not because Rommel was a Nazi, not because he was on the right side morally, but because he was effective at a specific level of warfare and because he left a record of how he did it. The answer to why American generals studied Rommel more than any other Nazi commander comes down to this: he was the enemy who taught them how to win. He humiliated American forces at their first major test, but he did it in a way that could be analysed, understood, and countered. He wrote books that explained his thinking. He fought a type of warfare that Americans could adopt and improve. And perhaps most importantly, he represented the warrior ethos stripped of political ideology. You can study Rommel's tactics without grappling with the Holocaust. You can learn from his operational methods without confronting the deeper horrors of the regime he served. That makes him pedagogically useful in a way that studying Himmler's SS tactics or Eichmann's logistics never could be. The story comes full circle decades after the war. In the 1970s, Manfred Rommel, Erwin's son, became the mayor of Stuttgart, Germany. At the same time, George S. Patton IV, the son of the general who supposedly read Rommel's book, is a major general in the US Army stationed in Germany. The two men meet. They become friends. The sons of enemies, bonded by the mutual respect their fathers had for each other's military competence. It's an extraordinarily German-American moment. We fought each other. We learned from each other. Now we're allies because the lessons transcended the politics. So what's the final lesson here? Why does this story matter beyond military history? Because it demonstrates something profound about learning. The best education often comes from your defeats, not your victories. The Americans didn't learn how to win by studying their successes. They learned by studying the man who beat them. They took humiliation and transformed it into competence. They faced the fact that they had been outgeneraled, outtacted, and outthought, and instead of making excuses, they asked how to do it better. That's not just a military lesson. That's a human one. Your worst defeat can be your greatest teacher if you're willing to learn instead of rationalize. Kasserine Pass was a disaster. But it was also the crucible that forged the US Army into the force that would sweep across Europe within 2 years, and the man who delivered that painful education, Erwin Rommel, became required reading not because Americans admired Nazis, but because they respected competence and learned from it. In warfare, in education, in life, you don't just study your successes. You study the person who beat you, and then you become better than they ever were. What do you think? Was Rommel's reputation deserved or inflated? Could American forces have avoided the disaster at Kasserine Pass if they'd studied his tactics before engagement? And does studying an enemy commander require a moral reckoning with the cause he served, or can tactical lessons stand separate from the political context? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found this deep dive into why the Desert Fox became required reading at the US Army War College fascinating, smash that like button and subscribe. Next time, we'll explore another moment where defeat became the foundation of future victory. Thanks for watching.